They were meant to change everything. Four-legged robots that could march with soldiers, carry their packs, and maybe even fight alongside them. BigDog. LS3. Really? What's up, BigDog? LS3. Spot. Like Spot the dog? Oh, sorry, this is Mega Projects. We're being serious. Let's carry on. The Vision 60, names that promised a future where metal dogs would take the weight, the risk, and the bullets. But it didn't quite work out like that. BigDog's gas engine howled like a lawnmower. LS3 stumbled into storage, Spot ended up an inspection tool, and the Vision 60 spent more time on fence lines than in firefights. Abroad, China shows off rifle-toting robo-dogs for the cameras. Russia dresses up a consumer toy, and Europe tests a handful before walking away. Still, the fascination never died, because if legs can go where wheels can't, then maybe, just maybe, one day the robot dog will escape the demo reel and finally live up to the promise in some ultimate Black Mirror shit. The early years. The story begins in 1980 when one Mark Raybert, then an associate professor of computer science and robotics at Carnegie Mellon University, founded the Leg Laboratory, an on-site institution focusing on pushing the boundaries of robotics, a technology which was in a primitive state, to say the least. There, he made things like this, the 3D one-leg hopper, built to test how well robots could balance. And sure, we'd be the first to admit that nowadays such robots don't exactly get the adrenaline pumping, but these were a big deal back in the day, as even such simple capabilities were all but the preserve of science fiction prior to their inception. More crucially, however, their success encouraged Raybert to take the plunge, to quit his day job and found a proper company to take his ideas further. And, well, the year was 1992, and that company's one you might have heard of, Boston Dynamics. At first, though, the company wasn't cranking out futuristic robot dogs or humanoids. It was making software, keeping itself afloat by building simulation tools for the US military, crafting programs like DI Guy, which could populate training environments with virtual humans who moved in a strikingly realistic way. Those early simulation contracts kept the lights on, but Raybert's obsession was never pixels on a screen, it was robotics in the real world. And so, come the late 90s, Boston Dynamics had started to pivot back into machines with legs, building small, rough-terrain prototypes to prove their code could live outside the lab. A few DARPA research projects, plus partnerships with Harvard's Concord Field Station for biomechanics and JPL for vision, set the path. Out of that mix of simulation pedigree and animal-inspired mechanics came BigDog. Anatomy of a robotic beast. A question, though, because what actually was BigDog? Well, put simply, what came marching out of Boston Dynamics' workshop was a boxy frame perched on 4 jointed legs with a 2-stroke engine note that had distant echoes of leaf blower about it. Its body was about the size of a decent all-weekend cooler, 3 feet long and 2.5 feet tall, and it weighed in at 240 pounds before it had been loaded up with any gear at all. So, indeed, BigDog. And as for more specifics about the engine, that little 2-stroke engine had a single cylinder and produced a mere 15 horsepower at the shaft when operating at its full whack of 9,000 RPM. And annoyingly, we couldn't find a figure for its displacement anywhere. Sorry about that. Although, for context, that power figure puts it basically on par with a small outboard boat motor. Think something like a Suzuki DF15A or a ride-on lawnmower. Doesn't sound like much, we know, and to be fair, objectively, it isn't much, but context is key. And here, the context is that the BigDog's engine was linked up to a hydraulic pump, which piped high-pressure fluid down into the legs, where a forest of pistons and valves did all the legwork, if you will. The engine just had to keep the juice flowing. And we mean juice literally and proverbially, because the engine was also hooked up to a generator to power its electrical systems. We're going to shout out our source for that claim too, Energy Sources of Mobile Robot Power Systems, a systematic review and comparison of efficiency. That's a 2023 paper by Tadeusz Michalisek and others, because frankly it took us bloody hours to nail that one tiny detail of BigDog's design down, and we want to show off having gone to such lengths. You're welcome. To bring it back on track, though, and also to be more specific than just it had a load of pistons and that sort of thing, the crux of it all was 16 hydraulic actuators. They are what give it its uncanny animal-like movement. Pump in more hydraulic juice and it moves one way, pump some out and it moves the other way. Bada bing, bada boom, BigDog moves. But how did it know what to do? Well, that'd be down to the vast amount of sensors, gyroscopes, and accelerometers that watched pitch and roll, load cells to measure exactly how much force each limb was pushing, contact switches to confirm every step, and stereo cameras backed up by a scanning laser that mapped the next few feet of trail ahead. And of course, all of that was plugged into a computer to do the thinking, with Boston Dynamics having mounted a stack of rugged PC-104 units that took the data in and spat out real-time commands to the hydraulic valves. One half of the brain worked at blinding speed just to keep the legs doing what they were told, while the other half planned ahead, calculating where the next footfall should go and adjusting the gait on the fly. It was, in crude form, the same split your own brain makes every time you walk down a flight of stairs without thinking about it. And it wasn't just about staying upright. BigDog could walk in a crawl, lifting one leg at a time, or trot like a horse with diagonally paired legs, or bound in short bursts across clear ground. It could also clamber up 35-degree slopes, march through snow, or ford shallow creeks, usually without complaint. Usually. Later prototypes even showed off a manipulator arm mounted to the body, which one Boston Dynamics engineer gleefully used to hurl a cinder block across a workshop, proving that the robot's legs provided a stable enough platform for serious brute force. In raw numbers, it could carry about 330 pounds of supplies, which, if you want to know what that actually translates to, call it 40-ish M16s. And if you think BigDog's legs looked too spindly to handle such loads, well, they weren't. They were heavily engineered, with springs and damping built into the joints so the robot could store and release energy as it walked, mimicking the way tendons bounce with every step. The feet themselves were crude but effective, flat pads studded with sensors that could tell whether they'd actually touched down, and with enough grip to let BigDog scramble over ice, mud, or gravel without looking too ridiculous. It was quite the clever system, really. The moment a foot sank further than expected, or a rock slipped under pressure, the robot knew it instantly and adjusted accordingly. The payoff to all of this was balance. Not theoretical, not in the lab on a treadmill balance, but real-world effective balance. Walk it onto a frozen lake and it would slip, stagger, and then somehow catch itself. To a decent degree, obviously it did have limits. And speaking of BigDog's limits, noise. That little two-stroke engine wasn't just audible, it was unmissable. A high-pitched, angry buzz that gave away its position long before it clattered into view. In fact, sod it. Rather than telling you, just listen for yourselves. See what I mean? Bit loud, yes? The hydraulic system had its own share of problems too. It liked to leak, it liked to overheat, and best of all, it came with that one attribute that every squaddy loves in their kit, a really, really intense maintenance routine. Parasitic loss, the steady bleed of power as every gear, shaft, and pump takes its cut, was a bit crap too. Remember when we said its little engine put out 15 horsepower at the shaft? Well, yes, it wasn't 15 horsepower by the time it reached the hydraulic pumps, put it that way. Still though, despite those flaws, it did, in its core concept, totally work. The boxy frame, the piston-stuffed legs, the tangle of sensors and cables. It was ugly, loud, and finicky, but it proved something no one had truly managed before. You could build a robot dog that walked, stumbled, slipped, and recovered in the real world. It didn't need perfect ground, or a tether to the ceiling, or carefully curated lab conditions. It just needed fuel in its tank, fluid in its veins, and a patch of rough ground to prove itself on. Besides, it was a technology demonstrator, so it didn't matter if there were a few kinks to iron out. Proving the core concept is all that mattered, and everything else would be sorted out later. Right? The LS3. Well, actually, kinda no. BigDog would be sent to live on a farm upstate in 2013 entirely because of its noisy engine. It was such a problem and such a part of its core design that it was eventually deemed a hurdle that simply couldn't be jumped. And so, BigDog met its end. But the dream itself was not dead, far from it in fact, because BigDog did prove the basic concept as viable, and so back to the drawing board the clever sorts at Boston Dynamics went to get to work on its successor, the legged squad support system, better known as the LS3. Work actually began before BigDog's cancellation too, as Boston Dynamics could read the writing on the wall, with development beginning in September 2009 and the funding contract with DARPA being announced to the world in February 2010. The Marine Corps ended up chipping in too, and when all was said and done, the LS-3 had some real money behind it. Not billions, don't get us wrong, but enough to matter, specifically around $32 million for an initial 30-month R&D phase, and about $42 million when all was said and done and extra phases were bolted on. And to be fair, many an eyebrow was raised when preliminary results started rolling in, as LS-3 was nothing if not more, weighing roughly 800 pounds empty, being able to carry a 400-pound payload, as well as carrying enough fuel for a 20-mile, 24-hour slog. The powertrain remained familiar, a combustion engine driving hydraulics, but this time it was an all the more sophisticated setup, 40 horsepower at the shaft and far less noisy. In fact, listen to the difference yourself. Is it silent? No, it is not. Is it a hell of a lot quieter than BigDog? Well, the simple fact that you can hear its servos actuating over the engine tells you that yes. Yes, it is. Control and autonomy improved big style too. Now, instead of being driven like a remote control car, i.e. manually, LS-3 layered leader-follow vision and voice commands into its system, so a handler could say, follow tight or follow corridor, and it would either trace the human's exact footsteps or pick its own line to the same endpoint. In short, BigDog proved the legs, LS-3 bolted on the eyes, ears, and muscle to make it actually useful. And with all looking well, the time soon came to start putting it through its paces with some testing, the most notable of which was done by the Marine Corps in 2014 as part of the wider RIMPAC exercise in Hawaii. There, a Marine detachment took LS-3 into the jungle, promptly named it Cujo, and treated it like a junior private with a strong back, loading it with roughly 100 pounds of water and ammo, pointing it at the path and seeing if it kept up. And it did. And through single-track underbrush, roots, and scattered rock, Cujo shadowed the file without clipping calves to ribbons and, crucially, without constant joystick babysitting. When it lost its footing, inevitably, as Marines aren't exactly known for being gentle and delicate creatures, it usually recovered on its own. When it didn't, it often self-righted at least, and failing that, one Marine could heave it over thanks to a low center of mass and rounded hull. In the end, the Marines reckoned that it could cross about 70 to 80% of ground. Not bad at all, given that much of that terrain was the stuff where a Humvee would have scored a 0%. As for what was in the 30 to 20% of terrain that it couldn't handle, the biggie was oblique hill traverses, i.e. side-hilling across a steep contour where the slope is forever nudging you downhill. Humans handle this with a million micro-corrections, most of which we don't even proactively think about, and while the LS-3 had hip torques and smart foot placement to help it out, it just wasn't enough. And then there's its other sin: noise. Turns out that, well, yes, it was quieter than BigDog, it wasn't exactly as silent as custard rustling. Certainly, it'd work for resupply and approach marches, but would it work on patrol in a potentially hostile environment? No, it wouldn't. Then there was the other bitter realities of field use. When it breaks down, which all machines do eventually, how do you repair an 800-pound robot on a ridge in the middle of nowhere without access to a workshop or parts? And then, what do you do if it can't be repaired at all and just catastrophically fails? To its credit, though, the LS-3 did grow throughout its trials. The autonomy tightened up, leader-follow got better on trails and through trees, and voice commands got more receptive. DARPA was fighting its corner too, with the program manager swearing that the LS-3, while, yes, not silent, was quieter than any tactically relevant internal combustion engine-powered machine. However, such enthusiasm did nothing to alter the fate of the LS-3, and when the money ran out, both DARPA and Boston Dynamics went out with their caps in hand to chase more funding, and none came. And so the LS-3 was put into storage in 2015. Its development not cancelled, technically, but just paused. Although, given it's been a decade since that point, it's probably not worth holding your breath. I mean, never say never, but it would be a bit of a miracle at this point, wouldn't it? The quieter cousin, Spot. But while the LS-3, like BigDog before it, might have ended up being all bark and no bite, Boston Dynamics wasn't done just yet. The glaring issue of noise was actually aware to them early enough, and so, in the mid-2010s, development began on the obvious solution: Spot, a four-legged robot which was to be battery-powered, thus allowing for silent running. Well, silent save for servos and the like, but their noise was never a complaint on BigDog or LS3, was it? Like their forerunners, Spot was given to the Marines to be put through its paces, with the first test occurring at Quantico in 2015. They walked it over hills and through woodlands, then shoved it into a mount drill, urban warfare basically, to see if it could be a point dog. Spot went into buildings first, peeking around corners with cameras and giving Marines eyes on rooms before they stepped through. For that job, silence mattered, and Spot did very well indeed. And as tests went on, it became increasingly apparent that Spot had great potential in the observation and reconnaissance roles, moving with an ease that neither BigDog nor LS3 ever had. Stair treads, door lips, tight corridors, it navigated them all happily. What Spot would never be, however, was a pack mule because it was tiny. Those early 2015 models came in at a mere 150 pounds and had a payload capacity of 30 pounds-ish. It was a necessary adaptation for the day's battery technology. It just couldn't hack anything bigger. With time, however, ever-improving battery technology would allow them to finally produce a real, legitimate, viable load-carrying robot for the military, but they didn't because they were bought by Google in 2013. Put simply, Google, or Alphabet, had no interest in becoming a robotics arm dealer. As said in the New York Times, quote, Google executives said the company would honor existing military contracts, but that it did not plan to move towards becoming a military contractor. As a result, Spot would be as far as Boston Dynamics as military work ever went, being available for purchase to militaries for sensing, logistics, and inspection work, and that's it. It hit the market in 2020, their first ever commercially available product, incidentally, and prices started at $75,000 for the poverty spec Explorer model, and reportedly can get as high as $200,000 if you add in a robot arm and a few other extras. Civilians are freely able to buy it too, and in fact, Spot has been quite successful in that regard. Ake BP sends Spot on routine rounds aboard the Scarv offshore platform to sniff for gas, read gauges, and stream thermal video so fewer humans need to suit up. The Pompeii Archaeological Park also uses Spot to map unstable tunnels and ruins that would be risky for staff to enter. And on big builds, firms like Hansel Phelps run them through sites after hours to laser scan progress, catching clashes and mistakes before they get buried in concrete. The gun dogs. Boston Dynamics' loss, however, was Ghost Robotics' gain. Badass name for a company, because when Alphabet steered the former away from military contracts, the latter was only too happy to fill the resulting gap, and thus they built a dog that could walk a fence line in the rain, carry a decent sensor head, and keep going when the ground got nasty. But it was no mere bot of burden, because it was packing heat. The platform was the Vision 60. Picture a 110-pound chassis, good for 3 or more hours of steady walking or 20 on standby, powered by battery, and fast enough to lope around at 3 meters a second when you need to close distance. That is some terrifying Black Mirror again. In terms of firepower, it doesn't always come armed. In fact, it's basically a Spot with the option to be armed, but when that option is taken, it's typically a normal rifle of some kind, with the nearest example being the Spur, or Special Purpose Unmanned Rifle from Sword International, a suppressed, magazine-fed rifle on a stabilized pan-tilt saddle that drops straight onto the dog's payload rails. It's chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor for flat shooting and reach, with a 7.62 by 51 NATO option if logistics matter more than ballistics. Advertised effective range is out to 1,200 meters with a day and night sighting stack. What Vision 60 does not have, however, is autonomy. No free-fire modes of any kind. It is a remote weapon stationed on legs. Nothing more exotic than that. Most of the time anyway, like we say, the weapon is still just the sensor head. It's a reconnaissance platform first and foremost. The US Air Force put it to the test in September 2020 at Nellis Air Force Base, where a Vision 60 trotted through a mock austere base as part of the service's future installation experiments. They liked what they saw too, and so Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida ended up taking delivery of the first units for use with daily security patrols with the 325th Security Forces Squadron. Not a mere demo, actual guard duty. The Air Force called them an extra set of eyes and ears that could take the long, dull, dangerous loops so airmen didn't have to. From there, they turned up at other bases for trials and integration work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real use. Or rather, it was to a limited degree. We don't have exact figures for procurement, but given that we were only able to find evidence of 4 in use at Tyndall, 1 with the Air National Guard generally, and some at other bases, coupled with the fact that Ghost Robotics themselves freely admit they only sold around 450 units in all, it stands to reason that the rollout was limited. And as you've likely gathered from the eyes and ears comment, the Air Force also did not buy armed variants. Not that there's a lack of enthusiasm for such capability within the US military, though. Far from it, in fact, as the services have been trying to marry guns and robots for years, just usually on tracks and wheels rather than legs. The first real stab was swords back in Iraq in 2007. A Talon bomb disposal chassis with either an M240 or M249 machine gun stuck on top. It looked the part, even deployed for a spell, but was pulled from service after reliability and safety scares, never having fired a shot in anger. Its replacement, the Modular Advanced Armed Robotics System, MARS, kept the same idea. A squat-tracked robot carrying an M240 or 40mm grenade launcher, but loaded with safety layers, hard no fire arcs, dead man switches, and interlocks to stop the thing ever pointing back at its own operator. The Marines trialed it at 29 Palms, and it made headlines, and then disappeared back into the testing sheds. Then there's the Robotic Combat Vehicle program. The light version mounts a 7.62 remote weapon station or Javelin missiles. The medium one is a prototype with a full 30mm cannon. Both are still in trials, both look like miniature IFVs without crews, and both share the same problem every other armed robot does. They work great on the flat range, then need constant arse-wiping the moment the terrain gets messy. Will such efforts go anywhere, or will they just end up being another LS3? A seemingly great idea that falls flat on its face. Ultimately, only time is going to tell. Overseas efforts. The US, however, isn't the only nation that's been experimenting with legged robots. Once quadrupeds proved they could balance and walk on messy ground, other militaries began to explore the idea themselves with gusto. China, for example, went in hard, with their efforts culminating in the unveiling of the Howling Sky 350 in January 2022, or as it was dubbed by domestic media and carried forward into foreign reporting, the Mechanical Yak. Claimed to be the world's largest quadruped robot, although we couldn't find anything concrete in the Chinese source's 4 dimensions, the Mechanical Yak can apparently take a 350-pound load, putting it a smidge below the capabilities of the LS3, and with a control state of 12 hydraulic servos, it can walk diagonally, turn on the spot, sprint, and even hop when needed. Footage shot in Inner Mongolia verifies this too, showing it clambering over steps, trenches, and low cliffs, then trudging on mud, grassland, desert, and snowfields. As for whether or not it's actually being rolled out, pass. It was developed independently by the China Electronics Technology Group Corporation, and while that alone alludes to some possibility, as they are quite the sizable defense supplier, we couldn't find anything that discussed its adoption at all. So for now, provisionally, consider it an LS3 whose fate has yet to be decided. They did have a go at an armed dog too, as in 2024 during the Golden Dragon joint drills with Cambodia, CCTV, a major media concern in China, proudly, appropriately named, isn't it, proudly showed off a pair of 4-legged robots padding alongside infantry. One was a light recon dog, barely bigger than a spaniel, lugging cameras and sensors on its back. The other was a heavier combat dog, close to 110 pounds, with a Type 95 rifle strapped to a pan-tilt mount on its spine. In the broadcast, soldiers steered the robots with controllers, while the gun dog poked into doorways and squeezed off bursts for the cameras. Chinese commentary around the exercise was explicit. These were meant to demonstrate how quadrupeds could clear corridors, provide short-range fire support, and scout tight urban terrain before humans entered. But ultimately, again, we couldn't find anything specific in Chinese media or from Beijing about it actually being rolled out. There's also been this one, the Machine Wolf. We know that it was developed by a subsidiary of the China Ordnance Equipment Group, and it is very clearly armed, specifically with a Type 191, not an AR-15 derivative, as the 2 English-language sites who picked up the story seem to think, and well, that's about all we know. It was only unveiled this year, 2025, so it's very much still a breaking news matter, and no doubt more details will come to light down the line. In a nutshell, China is where the US was in the early 2010s, the "ooh, wouldn't this be good" stage of development. Whether they end up rolling with the idea properly or shelving it like their trans-Pacific rivals, well, only time will tell. Russia has had a go too, although its efforts have been a bit thinner. Their attempt was unveiled at the Army 2022 Expo in Moscow, the M81 RoboDog, and yes, that is an RPG on its back, specifically an RPG 26. And naturally, it got bum squeaky all over Washington, D.C. until it was noticed that it was just a Chinese Unitary Go 1, a commercial civilian model with the launcher plunked on top, covered in super top secret, you aren't allowed to see the specifics because you'll totally want to copy it cloth. It was, to use a particularly eloquent expression, all fart and no poop. Russia's European neighbours have dabbled too, although from what we've read, there's yet to be any really substantial efforts. In 2021, for example, France had a play with our old friend, the Boston Dynamics Spot, running it through some trials at the Saint-Cyr Academy in the reconnaissance in tight spaces role. Unfortunately for Boston Dynamics' bottom line, however, France's line was a firm no, as there is no reporting at all about the country having gone through with an order thereafter. It's basically the same for Germany too. In September 2024, the Bundeswehr bought 4 Vision 60s for testing. They were explicitly unarmed and earmarked for reconnaissance, bomb disposal, support, and training. Again, it was a 9 from the Germans, because once testing was over, further references to any German use just stops, leading us to assume they didn't go ahead with procurement. So, TLDR, China is giving it a serious go and may end up going the whole way. Russia would like to, but it's Russia, so good luck with that, guys. And other powers have played with the idea, but not found enough merit to seriously move forward. Alright, so where does that leave us? Well, after 2 decades of hype, robot dogs simply have not redefined the battlefield. BigDog and LS3 proved that legs could work, but also that noise kills. Spot showed that 4 legs and a slender frame are handy in stairwells and corridors, but that a 30-pound payload means that any mule-like capabilities at all are just a non-starter. Ghost's Vision 60 carved out a niche as a guard dog, an extra set of eyes and ears plotting a perimeter. China is throwing scale and propaganda at the idea with hulking yaks and rifle dogs, but so far their future is unclear. Russia paraded a Chinese toy in cosplay, Europe trialed a few units, shrugged, and then went home. That doesn't mean it's over. Batteries keep getting better, sensors keep getting smaller, and costs fall as companies like Unitary ship cheap frames in bulk. It's not impossible that the robot mule or even the robot gun dog will be a serious component of near-future warfare. After all, it didn't take long at all for UAVs to become a serious player, did it? A decade ago, their situation was big expensive ones in the leading militaries. Oh look, those wacky jabbies in ISIS are strapping bombs to them. Ain't that mad? And now it's they're everywhere. How the hell are we gonna deal with these? Maybe robotic dogs will experience a similar leap in capabilities and utility. Maybe they won't. Only time will tell. And if they don't, they'll stay stuck in adolescence. Too loud, too weak, too expensive, too gimmicky. Winning on YouTube, but not in wars. A technology which was never bad enough to be written off as a total boondoggle, but never good enough to truly blossom. Thank you for watching.